The cities once roared with life, traffic, laughter, arguments, and the never-ending rhythm of humanity. Now, only sirens echoed in the broken cities of dead America. The streets of what used to be Denver were littered with debris, overgrown vines, and crumbling memories. And yet, deep within the ruins, humanity was not entirely lost. Captain Elena Ward crouched beside the remains of a half-burnt military outpost. Her eyes scanned the skyline, shattered glass windows, distant smoke plumes, and a red sun barely piercing through the dust clouds above. She adjusted her communicator. "We need to move before sunset," she whispered. "They're getting faster." Beside her, Private Noah Kessler nodded, clutching his rifle close. "We're not going to outrun them in the open again. We need higher ground." Elena had heard that suggestion too many times. High ground meant visibility. Visibility meant exposure. But staying still was even more dangerous. The outbreak had started 5 years ago, spreading silently from the shadows. Cities collapsed, governments failed, and the world transformed into a fragmented wasteland. Scientists called the infection the neurodecayer. It didn't just reanimate the dead, it enhanced their primal instincts. The undead weren't just wandering anymore, they hunted. Elena and Noah moved through the alleyways, careful not to trigger any noise. Drones from New Salem Command had dropped a supply beacon in this area 2 nights ago. If they didn't find it soon, their squad might not survive another week. They reached an abandoned transit station, the kind that once thrived with commuters. Now, all that remained were cracked tiles, graffiti-stained walls, and haunting silence. But just beyond the gates, a flickering blue beacon pulsed beneath the rubble. "There," Noah said, pointing. He started forward, but Elena held him back. "Wait." A faint dragging sound echoed from the tunnel below. Not the wind. Not rats. Something heavier. Something alive. They ducked behind a fallen column, watching the tunnel's dark opening. A moment passed. Then another. Silence. Elena signaled with her fingers, 3, 2, 1. They dashed toward the beacon. Noah cleared the debris, revealing a heavy-duty crate labeled Survival Kit 47B. He pried it open while Elena kept watch. Inside, med packs, EMP flares, ammo, water packets, and a sealed envelope marked for commanding officer eyes only. Elena slipped it into her jacket without hesitation. A sudden crash echoed from the tunnel entrance. Several things, were coming. "Run," Elena hissed. Noah slung the crate's pack over his shoulders. They sprinted through the back exit of the station, boots pounding against cracked concrete. Behind them, screeches filled the air, not animal, not human, an unnatural chorus of hunger. As they emerged onto the main road, a figure leapt out from behind a flipped bus, rifle raised. "Stop! Identify yourselves." Elena raised both hands. "Captain Ward, Unit 19 out of Fort Sentinel." "Lower your weapon." The stranger hesitated, then slowly lowered the rifle. He was older, face dust-covered, beard unkempt, but his eyes sharp. "You're from Fort Sentinel?" he asked. "Then you don't know." "Know what?" The man pointed toward the western skyline. A distant glow flickered, red, steady, unnatural. "They've started using fire," he said grimly. "The Horde's learning. They're not mindless anymore." Elena's heart sank. The undead were already strong. If they were evolving, if they were learning. The man introduced himself as Ryder, a former recon scout from Houston. He had been tracking a group of organized infected, fast movers, operating in packs, setting traps, and now apparently, using fire as a weapon. "They wiped out a whole camp near the Rockies," Ryder said. "Not just killed them. Outmaneuvered them." Elena's communicator buzzed faintly. Static. Then a voice, barely audible. "Command to Unit 19, prepare for Operation Phoenix, target is the core nest. Broken cities." She glanced at Noah. "Did you get that? Operation Phoenix?" The envelope. She opened it quickly. Inside was a single photo of an underground network beneath what used to be Chicago, in one phrase. "This is where it ends." The silence inside the military transport was heavier than the armored steel that surrounded it. As the vehicle rumbled toward what remained of Chicago, Captain Elena Ward clutched the mission file tighter. Operation Phoenix. She had read it 3 times during the flight, but the words refused to make more sense. The objective was simple: destroy the core nest. But the mission's tone, the vague wording, the absence of any extraction plan, it all screamed one thing. This wasn't a rescue. It was a sacrifice. Across from her, Noah checked his weapon in silence. Ryder sat next to him, eyes fixed on the flickering lights above. Their squad had grown by 3 more survivors picked up from scattered outposts: Mara, a tech engineer who had lost her entire bunker team in a tunnel ambush; Dixon, a silent sniper with scars down his neck; and Torres, a demolition expert with a shaky trigger finger but a mind sharp enough to craft bombs from scrap. "We're 6 against a hive of thousands," Ryder muttered. "And they expect us to walk into their lair like it's just another skirmish?" Elena didn't answer. She knew what they were all thinking. The core nest was more than a rumor. It was the heart of the Undead network, where the neurodecayer evolved, adapted, and learned. If what Ryder said was true, and the infected had begun to use tactics, tools, even fire, then the nest wasn't just a spawning pit, it was a control center. When the transport finally stopped, the back doors opened with a groan. A bitter wind swept in, carrying the stench of rot and ash. They had arrived on the outskirts of Chicago, now nothing more than a concrete graveyard swallowed by vines and shadows. Elena led the team down an abandoned subway entrance. The lights inside flickered erratically, powered by failing solar batteries. Along the walls, crude markings had been painted in red: "Turn back. Hive below. No salvation." They pressed on. The deeper they went, the more unnatural the air became. It wasn't just the decay. It was the silence. Even the rats were gone. Torres broke the hush. "This is a one-way trip, isn't it, Cap?" Elena didn't look at him. "If it is, we make it count." Mara had hacked into the old tunnel schematics before they lost signal. The maps showed a service entrance that led to a collapsed maintenance sector, beneath which was a massive chamber that had never been listed in any public documentation. The kind of place that could hide a nest. Or something worse. They reached a heavy service door with warning symbols scorched across it. Mara wired the panel. Sparks flew. The door groaned open, revealing darkness. Dixon slid his rifle forward. "I've got point." Inside, the space was massive, an underground industrial yard. Concrete pillars loomed like forgotten giants, and the ceiling dripped with water and mold. But that wasn't what froze them in place. The walls were pulsing. Veins of black growth clung to every surface. A thick, organic mesh ran across the floors like roots, feeding into something deeper. The infection had mutated, taken form, and it was alive. They moved cautiously, stepping over the growth, careful not to disturb anything. But it was already too late. From the far end of the chamber, a low screech rumbled through the tunnels. Shapes stirred in the dark, tall, fast, inhuman. Ryder's voice was barely a whisper. "They're guarding it." Elena raised her weapon. "No. They're waiting for us." Suddenly, floodlights snapped on overhead, flickering, inconsistent. A massive shadow moved in the distance, beyond the nest. And then they saw it. A towering undead figure stepped forward, twice the size of any they had encountered. It wore remnants of armor fused with its flesh. Its head was crowned with bone-like spines. Its glowing eyes locked onto them with terrifying focus. "This one's different," Noah breathed. "It's thinking." Elena understood in an instant. This was no random evolution. This was the Alpha. And it was protecting the core. The team pulled back toward a support corridor. Torres dropped a motion sensor and 3 claymores. "We can't take it head on. We draw it into the kill box, hit it with everything we've got." As they moved, Mara's radio buzzed, just once. A garbled voice. "They're watching." "Who?" Mara whispered. Then the static returned. Elena looked at her team, sweating, breathing hard, yet still willing to fight. "We end this," she said quietly. "Not for us. For what's left up there." And with that, they moved toward the shadows, where the final war was waiting. It didn't wait. The Alpha emerged fully from the nest, walking upright with an eerie calm. Its flesh shimmered like dark armor, and its breathing was rhythmic, deliberate. No dragging limbs. No mindless snarls. Just quiet rage in a monstrous shell. Captain Elena Ward had seen what the infected were capable of: ambushes, speed, coordination, but this thing was different. It wasn't reacting to instinct. It was thinking. "Fall back to the corridor," she shouted. The team scattered, rifles blazing. Bullets struck the Alpha, but they barely slowed it down. It moved with purpose, swatting debris aside and ducking behind steel columns to avoid direct fire. It was using cover. It was tactical. Noah and Ryder pulled into the support tunnel first, then Dixon and Torres. Mara and Elena followed close behind, but the Alpha turned suddenly and hurled a section of pipe like a javelin. It slammed into the wall beside Mara, sending her crashing to the floor. Elena grabbed her arm and yanked her up. "Move!" They reached the trap zone, a narrow corridor with only one way in. Torres armed the claymores with shaking hands. "If it steps through here, it's toast." The moment the Alpha entered the passage, the team unleashed their trap. The explosives triggered in sequence, 3 sharp blasts that lit the tunnel in orange fire. Dust and shrapnel flew in every direction. Silence. Then came the sound they feared most, a deep, guttural breath. The Alpha was still standing. It emerged from the smoke, charred but unfazed. One of its arms hung loosely by a few tendons, but it didn't seem to notice the injury. Its eyes burned brighter now, focused, locked on Elena. Noah opened fire again. Ryder flanked from the side, launching a flare grenade directly at its face. The creature recoiled, roaring, blinded briefly by the flash. "Go now!" Elena shouted. "We won't get another opening." They ran, deeper into the tunnels, zigzagging through rusted maintenance shafts and storage corridors. Behind them, the Alpha's footsteps echoed louder and faster. "This thing doesn't stop," Dixon muttered. "It doesn't even slow down." Mara suddenly paused at a sealed blast door. "Wait, this leads to the geothermal vent chamber. If we can get the pressure to spike." "Are you saying we cook it?" Torres asked, catching on. "Exactly." While Mara worked the controls, Elena held the rear with Noah and Ryder. The corridor trembled with each step of the pursuing Alpha. It wasn't just after blood, it was protecting something. The nest. The evolution. Maybe even the future of the undead. Mara shouted, "Doors open, go!" The team poured into the chamber. It was massive and glowing red from the heat below, pipes hissed steam and ancient gauges blinked in error. This had once been a heat exchange facility beneath the old power grid. Torres ran toward the main valve panel. "I can overheat it, but once it goes, we've got 10 seconds max to escape." The blast door slammed shut behind them. The Alpha pounded on the other side, each impact a thunderclap. "Get ready!" Elena called. Torres twisted the release valve. Steam burst from the ceiling. Warning sirens blared in delayed response. The temperature spiked. The Alpha burst through the door, pushing the twisted steel aside like it was cardboard. Scorched, bleeding, still fighting. The team fired with everything they had: shotguns, grenades, even flares. The creature screamed in fury, pushing forward, driven not by hunger, but by purpose. Then the floor beneath it cracked. Superheated steam surged up from the vents. The Alpha staggered, its skin blistering, armor melting. Elena didn't wait. She sprinted toward the emergency tunnel. "Now! Get out!" They escaped through the maintenance shaft just as the chamber behind them exploded. The shockwave knocked them off their feet. The roar of collapsing steel echoed behind them like a dying monster's scream. Silence. Elena rolled over, coughing, ears ringing. Everyone, status? One by one, the team checked in, alive, bruised, shaken. Noah stared back at the sealed shaft. Tell me that thing's dead. But Mara, eyes wide and voice low, whispered, I don't think that was the only one. The weight of her words settled over them like a shadow. If there was one alpha, there could be more. And if the nest was producing leaders, then the final fight hadn't begun yet, it was just building. The team didn't stop running until the air turned cold and the sound of dripping water replaced the thunder of collapsing metal behind them. The tunnel opened into a derelict maintenance platform, barely lit by failing backup lights that flickered like dying stars. They were alive, but something had changed. Captain Elena Ward paced in silence, her hands still trembling from the heat and adrenaline. Noah sat on the edge, breathing hard. Ryder kept checking his ammo, as if the weight of bullets would somehow push away the weight of what they had just seen. Mara stared blankly at the cracked wall. That alpha wasn't natural. It wasn't just mutated, it was trained. And if the Hive built one, it means they've figured out how to replicate the process. Dixon, usually silent, finally spoke. I saw something while we were running. When the alpha was falling, something watched us from the vents. It wasn't afraid. Torres frowned. Another one? Smaller, Dixon said. But it had the same eyes. A sick, cold realization swept over them. The undead were evolving, and they weren't mindless anymore. The infection wasn't just spreading. It was building an army. And now it had generals. Elena tapped her radio, praying for a signal. Static. Then, a faint voice. To all surviving units. Core nest compromised. Repeat, contact lost with North Zone, unknown entities approaching. Alpha variants confirmed. The message looped. Broken. Damaged. But the warning was clear. What's North Zone? Ryder asked. Mara turned slowly. Denver. One of the last functioning outposts. Noah cursed under his breath. That was our backup line. If Denver falls. Elena didn't let him finish. Then Dead America becomes everything. We need to warn them. But before they could move, the walls around them seemed to pulse, just once. What was that? Torres whispered. A low, guttural growl echoed through the far end of the tunnel. From the shadows emerged a figure, taller than a man but not as monstrous as the alpha they'd faced. It was leaner, faster-looking, with elongated limbs and skin stretched tight over sinew. Its head cocked to the side, studying them like prey. Then another dropped from above. And another. 3 of them. Their movements were precise. Coordinated. They're not just stronger, Elena said slowly. They're working together. The creatures didn't charge. They herded the team, forcing them backward, deeper into the facility. The exit path was cut off. Every time one of them flanked, the others moved in sync. Go loud. Elena barked. Gunfire erupted in the tight space. Muzzle flashes lit the corridor. The creatures danced between bullets, fast and deliberate. One lunged at Dixon, he dropped to one knee and shot it point blank in the throat, but it didn't die. It bit down on the rifle and dragged him forward. Ryder launched a stun grenade. The explosion disoriented the creatures for seconds, just long enough for the team to regroup. We need height advantage. Mara shouted. The old subway junction is above this tunnel. They climbed up an emergency access ladder, bursting into an abandoned transit station. It was hollowed out and dark, but open. As they emerged, they weren't alone. A figure stood waiting at the far end. Human. Female. Wearing scavenged armor made from old riot gear and tech harnesses. Stay down, she barked, raising a makeshift railgun. With a powerful hum, she fired. One of the Alpha variants was ripped in half by the blast as it climbed after them. The others hissed and retreated. "What the hell are you?" Ryder asked, panting. She approached slowly. Her face was scarred, and her eyes sharp. "I'm from Outpost Echo. Or what's left of it. Name's Tessa." She looked over their group. "You've seen them too?" Elena nodded grimly. "We took down an Alpha." "Barely." Tessa's jaw tightened. "Then you know what's coming." She knelt beside the remains of the creature she shot. "They're called Phantoms. Faster, smarter, and they only answer to Alphas. There are more of them, across the broken cities. We've counted at least 5 confirmed Alpha sightings in the last month." Mara whispered, 5. Elena's mind raced. "If they're uniting, forming ranks." Tessa finished the thought. "Then humanity's fighting an organized enemy now." The city around them was silent, but Elena knew the quiet wouldn't last. They had stumbled into something much bigger than a mission. This was the beginning of a new kind of war. The skyline of the broken city was jagged and silent, like the ribs of a dying beast poking through the smog. Crumbling towers leaned in every direction. Fires burned in the distance, some left to die, others kept alive by desperate hands. The roads below were barely visible through the shifting mist. But humanity still moved beneath the ash. Elena crouched beside a rusted signpost that read District 7. Beyond it, Outpost Echo sat hidden inside the shattered remains of an old stadium. Floodlights flickered weakly across the top, their power drawn from salvaged solar rigs and a failing generator. The defenses were crude, barbed wire, steel scraps, and sandbags, but someone had held the line here. "They survived this long?" Ryder asked, peering through binoculars. "Without military backup?" Tessa nodded. "They weren't military. Just people who refused to give up. Mechanics. Nurses. Even a few ex-cons. But they know how to fight." As the team approached, a hidden turret locked onto them. Elena froze, raising both hands. "We're friendlies. From Recon Unit Sierra." A second later, the turret powered down. From behind a wall of broken fencing, a large man stepped out, clutching a sledgehammer like it was an extension of his arm. "If you're lying," he growled, "you won't get a second chance." "That's Mason," Tessa muttered. "He's the unofficial leader here. Doesn't talk much, but if you see him run, follow." Inside the stadium, it was like walking through the last heartbeat of civilization. Makeshift tents lined the halls. Children drew pictures on the concrete floors. Older survivors stood guard with scavenged weapons, most of them handmade. There was no joy here, only determination. Mason led them into what used to be the VIP lounge. Now it was a war room. A massive map of dead America stretched across the floor. Pins, notes, red string, all pointing to clusters around key cities. Denver. Atlanta. Dallas. Chicago. All surrounded. All fading. "These aren't random attacks," Elena said, examining the layout. Tessa nodded. "We believe the Alphas are hurting the hordes, pushing humans inward. They're clearing the map." "And Denver's next," Mara added. Noah leaned forward. "Then we don't wait. We hit back before they complete the ring." Mason raised an eyebrow. "With what army?" Elena looked around. "With what's left." That night, the stadium lit up with the sound of voices, planning, gathering, sharpening blades, and hope. Word was sent out via shortwave radio. Signal runners were dispatched through tunnels and alleyways. And slowly, they came. From the sewer enclaves of New Chicago. From the shattered remnants of militia groups near the Gulf. From rooftop camps across the plains. Survivors. Fighters. Builders. Every group had scars. Every person had lost something. A brother. A daughter. A whole town. But they came. 3 days later, more than 100 fighters stood within Outpost Echo. They were untrained, tired, and running low on supplies. But they had fire in their eyes. Mason, standing before them with Elena and Tessa at his side, said only one thing: if we don't stop them here, there is no later. The plan was simple. Strike first. They would divide into strike teams and hit key alpha nests simultaneously across 3 city zones. The goal: kill the phantoms, destroy the new hatching grounds, and disrupt their control system. It was risky. It was almost suicidal. But it was all they had left. As night fell, Elena stood alone at the top of the stadium, staring out at the shattered landscape. Ryder joined her, quietly handing her a flask of filtered water. "You think this'll work?" he asked. "No," she admitted. "But it might be the only thing they don't expect." He smiled. "Then let's give them a surprise." From below, flares launched into the sky, 1 red, 2 white. The call had gone out. The last fighters in the dead cities were moving. And for the first time in a long time, humanity wasn't just surviving. It was striking back. The night was quiet, too quiet. Beneath the shattered towers of the ruined city, the survivors moved like shadows, their faces grim and determined. They had gathered everything they could: firearms, explosives, homemade armor, and now, they were ready. The attack was set to begin at dawn. Captain Elena Ward surveyed the makeshift base. The fighters, who had only days ago been strangers to one another, now shared a common goal. A single spark of hope flickered between them. But she knew, hope alone wouldn't be enough. They had to be smart, quick, and ruthless. Tessa's voice broke her thoughts. "They're moving out. First teams are in position." Elena nodded, checking her gear one last time. "I know. We can't afford to wait any longer." As dawn broke, a cacophony of sounds ripped through the still air: sirens, the distant crack of gunfire, the rattle of chains, and the eerie screeches of the undead as they began to stir. They were waking up, and they were hungry. The survivors had split into 3 groups. Each group was targeting a different alpha nest. Their goal was simple: kill the phantoms, disrupt the alpha's hold over the hordes, and leave as much damage as they could in their wake. If they succeeded, the alphas would be disoriented, their control fractured. If they failed... Elena clenched her fists. She couldn't afford to think like that. As the first shots rang out, Elena and her team made their move. They cut through the city's shattered streets, using the cover of the old subways to remain hidden. Every corner, every alley felt like a trap. They had no choice but to keep moving, but every turn they took seemed to bring them closer to the heart of the nest. Mara, her rifle aimed ahead, whispered through the comms, "We're close. I can hear them." The group stopped near an abandoned parking garage. Tessa, who had been scouting ahead, crouched beside Elena. "This is it. The nest's just around the corner." Elena motioned for the team to stay low. They had to move quickly, silently. Every second was a risk. They crept forward, moving like shadows through the ruins. But as they neared the entrance to the nest, the unmistakable sound of movement echoed from the shadows. Their hearts froze. A phantom emerged from a side alley, its eyes glowing eerily in the dim light. It was quick, moving with an unnatural grace as it flanked them. Another appeared from the opposite side. "No time," Elena hissed. "Take them down." The sound of gunfire filled the streets as the survivors fought back. Elena fired twice, hitting the first phantom in the chest, but it barely slowed down. It swiped at her, narrowly missing her face. Tessa's railgun charged and fired, striking the creature square in the head, but even that didn't bring it down completely. The phantoms were different, faster, stronger, more resilient. "Fall back," Elena ordered. The team began to retreat, but the phantoms were relentless. They surged forward, forcing the survivors deeper into the city. As they rounded a corner, Elena's heart sank. There, waiting for them, was the Alpha. Towering, its grotesque form silhouetted against the rising sun. Its eyes glowed with an intelligence that no other undead had ever shown. It roared, loud enough to shake the air. The phantoms stopped, obeying its command. They circled, closing in on the survivors from every direction. "We need to move, now!" Elena shouted, but it was too late. The Alpha lunged, its claws tearing through concrete as it pounced toward them. The survivors fired, but the shots barely made a dent. The Alpha's hide was thick, impervious to their weapons. Tessa launched another explosive round from her railgun, but the blast only staggered it for a moment. Then, it attacked. One of the phantoms darted past, knocking Dixon to the ground. His screams echoed through the city as the creature's sharp claws ripped through his armor. Another phantom grabbed Mara, pulling her into the shadows before she could react. "Elena! Get out of here!" Ryder shouted, firing his rifle with desperation. "We'll hold it off." "No!" Elena screamed, but the situation was spiraling too fast. They were losing ground, losing people. The plan was falling apart. Then, a bright flash of light cut through the chaos. A rocket-propelled grenade slammed into the Alpha, sending it reeling back. The team looked up, and for the first time, they saw reinforcements, the second strike team, led by Mason. With synchronized precision, the strike team unloaded a barrage of firepower on the Alpha and its phantoms. The creatures hissed and recoiled, but the Alpha fought back with deadly force, knocking one of the soldiers to the ground with a single swipe. Elena took advantage of the opening. "Ryder! Mara! Get to the grenade launcher," she ordered. They sprinted toward the vehicle, and with seconds to spare, Ryder launched a second explosive round directly at the Alpha's chest. The explosion was deafening, a shockwave that knocked everyone off their feet. When the smoke cleared, the Alpha was down, its body twisted in a grotesque heap. The remaining phantoms hesitated for just a moment. Elena didn't wait. She turned, leading the charge as the team tore through the nest, destroying the hatching grounds and setting the explosives that would tear down the Alpha's command structure. They had succeeded in breaking the heart of the city's undead control, but the war was far from over. The first battle had been won, but Dead America was still very much alive. The aftermath of the battle left a bitter taste in the air. The survivors stood amidst the burning wreckage of the Alpha's nest, their bodies bruised and broken. But as the smoke drifted upward, it wasn't victory that filled the hearts of the remaining fighters, it was dread. The city was quiet again, but it wasn't peace. Elena wiped the sweat from her brow, watching the skyline. The first signs of the blood moon had begun to appear, casting an eerie crimson hue over the horizon. It was as if the night itself had come alive, warning them that the Alpha wasn't finished. "We hit them hard," Mason said, his voice low but filled with resolve. "But they'll be back. They'll come." Elena nodded. The Alpha they had faced was only one of many, and the undead were like an unstoppable storm, their numbers constantly growing, their intelligence evolving. It was only a matter of time before they regrouped and launched a counterattack. "I've seen it before," Ryder said, stepping up beside Elena. His face was grim. "We're not fighting against the undead anymore. We're fighting against something far worse, them." "The phantoms?" Elena asked. "No," Ryder replied, eyes narrowing as he looked out over the wreckage. "The Alphas. They're learning. They've adapted. They're becoming something else." A sudden burst of static came from their radio, cutting through the tension. "Recon Unit Sierra, do you copy?" Elena grabbed the radio. "This is Sierra. Report." A strained voice crackled through. "We've got movement in the northern sectors. Big movement. They're organizing. More of them, and they're coming fast. The blood moon, it's like they've been waiting for it." "Shit," Tessa muttered from behind them, her eyes darting to the sky. The eerie glow of the blood moon was growing stronger, and with it came an unsettling silence. Mason stepped forward, his face hardening. "They're coming. And they're bringing everything they've got." Elena didn't hesitate. She turned toward the survivors still gathering in the ruins, organizing ammunition and prepping weapons. "Everyone, listen up. The Alphas are retaliating. We're not done yet. Get ready. We move out in 1 hour. The city seemed to hum with a dark energy as they prepared for what might be their final stand. The survivors gathered their gear, eyes wide with fear but burning with a fierce resolve. They'd seen what the undead were capable of, but now they understood, the war had escalated. The enemy was no longer just a mindless horde. The Alphas had become their own army. As night fell, the streets became a battleground. The survivors had fortified their position as best they could, setting up traps, barricades, and defensive lines, but they knew it wouldn't hold for long. The Alphas were smart. They had adapted. They knew how to destroy these makeshift defenses, and they wouldn't stop until they had wiped out every last one of them. "We've got one shot at this," Elena said, her voice cutting through the tension. "We can't outlast them. But we can take the fight to them. We're hitting their command center. We take out their leaders, disrupt their strategy, they'll fall apart." Mason nodded. "How do we even know where their command center is?" "They're not hiding anymore," Ryder said, scanning the surroundings. "They're out in the open. All we need to do is find where the largest concentration of phantoms and alphas are, and that's where they'll be. That's their stronghold." The city was now alive with the unmistakable sounds of the undead. A low, guttural growl echoed through the streets, followed by the thunderous footsteps of the horde. The survivors stiffened, preparing for the onslaught. "We don't have much time," Tessa said, adjusting her armor. "Get in position. We're moving out in 5 minutes." The survivors scattered into the shadows, each of them taking their designated posts. The tension in the air was thick, the only sound the beating of hearts and the occasional whisper over comms. The first wave came sooner than expected. Phantoms surged from the alleyways, their screeches tearing through the night. But this time, the survivors were ready. Explosives detonated in the distance, sending shockwaves through the ground as the team launched their counterattack. Gunfire rang out in rapid succession, echoing in the dead silence of the broken city. Mara's rifle barked through the chaos as she fired off precise shots, taking down the phantoms as they charged. "We've got them on the ropes," she yelled, but Elena could see the truth. The tide was shifting. This wasn't a victory. It was a delay. From the shadows, a massive figure emerged, its hulking silhouette easily recognizable against the backdrop of the blood moon. The Alpha had arrived, and this time, it was not alone. The sky seemed to darken further, the moon's red glow more menacing than before. A deep growl rumbled in the air, and suddenly, the ground beneath their feet trembled. The horde had arrived. And with it, the Alphas, their true leaders, emerged from the depths. The final fight was about to begin. The moon hung high, casting an unnatural crimson hue over the decimated city. A silence as thick as the air before a storm enveloped the survivors as they stood, weapons aimed, hearts racing, eyes locked on the Alpha at the forefront of the undead army. The Alpha's massive form towered over the remaining phantoms, its eyes glowing with malevolent intelligence. Elena's voice cut through the stillness. "This is it. We make our stand here." The horde moved forward, a terrifying wave of bodies, a mix of undead and their monstrous leaders. The phantoms screamed, the Alphas growled, and the air buzzed with the rising tension. Every fiber of Elena's being screamed at her to run, to give in to the overwhelming odds, but she stood firm. They had no choice but to fight. "We hold the line," Mason said, his voice steady, though his hands were clenched tightly around his weapon. "We fight until we can't." The survivors took their positions, preparing for the final battle. The city's broken streets became their battleground, a place where the fate of humanity would be sealed. Elena moved quickly, scanning the battlefield. "Everyone, listen up. We've got one shot at this. The Alphas are the key. If we can take them down, we can break the control they have over the undead." "But how?" Tessa asked, her eyes wide with disbelief. The scale of the threat had sunk in. The Alphas were unlike anything they'd fought before. "We've got explosives, we've got firepower," Elena said, gripping her rifle. "And we've got each other." The battle erupted as the first wave of phantoms surged forward, their shrieks cutting through the air. Elena fired her weapon, taking down one of the creatures with a headshot, but more replaced it almost instantly. The survivors fought back with everything they had, bullets flying, explosions lighting up the night. But the Alphas were moving now, fast and coordinated. They had learned to fight with precision, and they were leading the horde with terrifying efficiency. A loud roar pierced the air, and the Alpha leader charged. It was a hulking beast, its claws slicing through the air like deadly blades. It locked eyes with Elena, its gaze burning with rage, as though it recognized her as its ultimate adversary. "Elena!" Ryder shouted, firing at the Alpha, but the beast barely flinched. The gunfire did nothing against its thick hide. "We've got to distract it," Elena yelled, realizing they couldn't defeat it head-on. She turned to Mason. "Set up the explosive charge on the central pillar. We need to collapse the building and trap them." Mason nodded, darting toward the center of the battlefield. "Cover me," he shouted as he sprinted, his footsteps heavy against the broken ground. Elena and Tessa provided covering fire, shooting at the advancing phantoms and Alphas. They were relentless, pushing forward with a fury that couldn't be stopped. But every shot they fired, every explosive they set, only bought them a few more seconds of survival. Ryder, his face twisted in concentration, aimed his rifle at the Alpha leader. "We're running out of time, Elena." "I know." Elena's voice was tight, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. They had been through so much, lost so many, and now it came down to this. If they failed, humanity was done for. The Alpha leader's roar filled the air once more, and it charged directly toward Elena. She dove to the side just in time as the creature's claws slashed through the air, narrowly missing her. "Get to the charge!" Elena screamed at Mason. "Now!" Mason, sweating and panicked, reached the pillar and began to set the explosives, but the Alpha leader wasn't far behind. It lunged at him, sending him flying through the air. "No!" Elena shouted, pushing herself to her feet. Without thinking, she rushed toward Mason. She couldn't lose him now. She couldn't lose anyone else. The Alpha's massive hand grabbed Mason by the throat, lifting him into the air as he struggled. "Elena!" Mason gasped, his fingers clawing at the Alpha's hand. A shot rang out. The Alpha froze. Elena's heart skipped a beat as she saw Ryder's rifle pointed at the beast. But the Alpha didn't flinch. Instead, it growled, its grip tightening on Mason. Without hesitation, Elena lunged. She grabbed a grenade from her belt and pulled the pin, throwing it directly at the Alpha's chest. Time seemed to slow as the grenade exploded, sending a shockwave through the battlefield. The Alpha staggered back, roaring in pain, its massive body thrown off balance. In the chaos, Mason dropped to the ground, gasping for air. "Elena!" Mason cried, his voice filled with relief and pain. Elena didn't wait. She rushed toward him, helping him to his feet, and with a desperate look, she yelled, "The explosives! We need them now!" The charge was set. The survivors retreated as the Alpha leader stumbled back, its roar now a death knell. The building began to tremble, the ground shaking beneath their feet as the final countdown started. The explosion was deafening. The shockwave of destruction was a blinding flash, followed by a deep rumble as the building collapsed into the wreckage. The Alphas howled in fury, but the survivors had done it. They had taken down the heart of the Undead's power. As the dust settled, Elena stood among the ruins. The city was silent now, the Undead horde broken, their leaders vanquished. The survivors were battered, their faces marked by exhaustion and loss, but they had done it. They had won the war. "We did it," Tessa said softly, her voice full of disbelief. Elena looked up at the blood moon, its eerie glow now fading into the night. The fight was over, but the price had been high. The world was forever changed. "We did," Elena whispered, her voice steady but weary. "We survived. And for the first time in years, we can begin again." The battle for Dead America had been won, but the journey for the survivors was just beginning. End of Part 8, the final chapter. Let me know if you'd like me to make any revisions or create another story.